I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the 2022 Kia Sorento S V6, which is the least expensive 4th generation Sorento. Now, up until the 3rd generation Sorento, it was always kind of just a car, reliable but not really that great. Whereas the 3rd generation one that came in 2014 really made this nameplate step up. And so there's probably quite a lot riding on the 4th generation car, and so far we've really liked it. But this is the first time we've actually poured over the absolute base model here in clear white that costs nothing extra for $49,290 drive away. So this is the least amount of money you're going to have to pay for a 7-seat Kia in Australia. Much like the previous Sorento, underneath this generation of Sorento is the Hyundai Santa Fe. They both share the same N3 platform, although the Sorento is slightly larger than the Santa Fe, which, as it was with the old car, which kind of positions it as a little bit bigger option. This car has a 28 15mm wheelbase, the old Sorento had a 2780, and the current Santa Fe has a 2765. So you kind of think this should work better as a 7-seater. One area where I think it works really well is when you start to look in on the details of this car. This Sorento S model here doesn't really look like a base model from the front. I know that these overstyled headlights look a little bit like they've got halogens in them, but they don't. They have LEDs in them. They're very white. This DRL here has a really cool signature at night time, and down here we have LED fog lights as well. So it kind of has this front of something that's a lot more expensive than what it costs. We do have Kia's old generation badge though. However, I've heard that the plug-in version of it will have Kia's new logo. So next year, that'll be gone. Another big change from the past is the footwear that this 4th gen Sorento wears. The previous model in this V6 front-wheel drive version, because you can only get front-wheel drive in a right-hand drive V6, had these Nexen N-Pris tyres that were just terrible in the wet, especially with all this power from the V6 under the bonnet. Whereas here, we actually have high-quality Continental tyres, Conti Eco Contact 6 on 17-inch alloys, so the best riding Sorento of the lot. And it doesn't really need bigger alloys than this because these tyres actually have grip, unlike the model before. Now, it is front-wheel drive, so you think, well, is this really an SUV? It's certainly not a 4-wheel drive, and I would say that 176mm of ground clearance would indicate that. You don't really take this off-road. It's all about looking like it might go off-road. Speaking of looks, I really like the way the car looks, and I love these taillights. I was trying to think of what they're inspired by, and I think maybe a 68 Mustang, certainly something American, but yet it doesn't look overstyled, especially the back of this car. Like these cool little cutouts here, the name just subtly put across the bottom, the wiper hid up in the back here like on a new Hyundai Tucson, just gives the Sorento an air of cleanliness. Now it has a full-size 17-inch spare underneath, can also tow 2 tons, which is kind of par for the course of a large 7-seat monocoque SUV like this. In the boot here, we have a pretty decent amount of space. This is 616 litres with all the Chasing Cars bags buried in the back, but if we had the rear seats up, there's only 187, which is less than what the Kluger's is. I think that's 241. But these backrests also just come up and stay into one position, whereas in the Toyota you can adjust and make them vertical, which is probably a better idea. In here, we also have a 12-volt outlet. We have these 2 little second row buttons where you can actually make the backrests drop with little solenoids, which is kind of cool. The luggage cover is under this bit here, and it's just all really nicely finished. One more very important point for the potent breeders among us is that unlike the Toyota Kluger, the Sorento actually has top tether in the 3rd row, as well as 2 Isofix down here to put kids' seats in, and 2 Isofix in the middle row with 3 top tether. So you could have 5 kids in baby seats if you had whatever 5 babies is. Is it quintuplets? I don't know. That's a lot of babies. The Sorento's individual design definitely continues inside. Now, the last car was trying to be a bit European and just make it a little bit sort of minimalist and clean, whereas here, Kia's gone, stuff that, we're going to do exactly what we want. and I kind of love it. It is sort of a little bit retro 80s, but also not that at all. It's completely its own thing. No other large SUV looks like this. So, yay Kia. Now, even the top line GT line has this sort of brushed metal. I don't think it's really metal, I think it's plastic, but this brushed metal sort of mottled finish with this stitching on the dash and all this sort of stuff. All this is shared across the range, including these really cool big door handles here, and also these really cool air vents that have 2 layers, which is a little bit weird when you have your knee being cooled, but you soon learn how to sort of position them and move around the little levers, so all of it is working in your favor. Now, this S spec model is the absolute stripper, but as you would expect, it's not really. Like, we have electric auto folding mirrors, we have a leather bound steering wheel, which is a great thing on a base model these days. We also have push button aircon. We have 3 USB ports down here for this 8-inch touchscreen. The upper models get 10.25. This one has 8, but it's still fine. And you know what? Even though you have to plug in the thing for wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and it only has 6 speakers, it actually sounds really good. Yet another base model stereo that is so far beyond the base model stereos of the past that you're not being hard done by. If you had to pick on it, you'd go, well, it's got push button aircon, but it's not that hard to work. We're all used to that by now. And compared to, say, the Toyota Kluger that we drove last week, it just has a sort of a cohesion and a bit more luxe about it. Like, from this sort of padded armrests in the doors that are a lot closer to where you're sitting, to these beautiful sort of inbuilt door grabs that are on all doors, particularly in the back, as we shall see, and this armrest in the center here that's nicely padded, but also just opens up nice and simple, has a tray here where it has phones in it, and it has all of this in here as room. Really easily accessible, although it doesn't slide, and just useful. In terms of the design of the instruments and stuff, we just have regular analog dials here with a small screen in the middle that scrolls through basic information, but that's all you really need. We have adaptive cruise control on the right here, automatic headlights, auto wipers, the front fog lights, as I mentioned before. It has rear fog lights as well. So besides the push button air, like, there's a lot in here. In terms of storage as well for drinks, we have these 2 cup holders here. We have another little tray here where you could easily put a pair of keys. This one here has pen written all over it, but no one carries a pen. And ironic storage winning, Nature's Electrolyte fits perfectly in this little bit here, and you've still got one of those crapo 600ml things that the Koreans love to go down in the bottom here. But there's a surprise in the back seat, which I'll show in a minute. One more thing I should point out is this beautiful trim. It's just simple cloth trim, but this sort of pattern stuff in the middle is sort of very 60s, 70s retro, but also feels really hard wearing, and that person there has full height adjustment via a crank on the side, as does the driver. In fact, this seat goes so low, I don't even have it on its lowest setting, so it's designed for tall people as well as short. Now, I'm not deliberately picking on Korean cars for not having any bottle storage, but it's because they don't. However, my bitching stops here, because look at this. In this car, you can fit this thing here, and you can fit another one of them in here in the door, which is extremely unusual, but also quite cool, because I think that is just perfectly situated. It also has these awesome big door handles, as per before, and these great door armrests too. In this Sorento S, we also get 2 layers of netted mat pockets, a netted here and another one here on both sides of the car. And this seat is on runners on both sides, as you'd imagine. So I can go a fair way forward and still it goes to here, which is quite a bit of movement. It does have a 12-position backrest as well. And it also has solenoid controlled sliding to get into the back seat, which I'll show you in a minute. This center armrest here has 2 more cup holders to join this array of display over in the door here. And we have a pair of center air vents in the same cool shape as in the front, and a 12-volt outlet, and 1 USB port to fight over. Now, there is a bit of a technique to getting in the third row of the Sportage. You would think that pulling the levers on the side here would just instantly slide the seat forward, but it actually does the backrest rake of the seat, and if you pull the lever on the side, the backrest folds completely flat, which is what also happens when you push the two buttons in the boot. Now there are two buttons here. There's one on the tops of the backrest and there's one on the side here. They both do the same thing. They're both on a solenoid. If you push it, it does that and slides forward. So as I elegantly climb in the back here and then grab it and hold it, it slides back, and wherever you let go of the backrest, it'll hold in position. Now sitting in here, I do have my feet completely tucked under that row, but I've actually got a reasonable view. The backrest is in an okay position, and I'm not a child, I'm an adult, so it's not too bad. There's two cup holders on either side. There's these little trays here that say no drinks. I thought they actually said no cigarettes, but it doesn't really apply anymore. We've got one 12-volt outlet you can access from the boot. No air vents in here, but I can see the ones in the front, so I suspect that there'll be a flow from there into the back here like there is in a CX-9. In the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $1,047 to comprehensively insure a new Kia Sorento. However, everybody's situation is different and your premium will vary according to things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you go at your car, and your driving history. The official combined fuel consumption number for the Kia Sorento S V6 is 9.7 litres per 100 kilometres. However, we average 12.3 litres per 100 kilometres over fairly varied driving conditions. The warranty for the car is 7 years or unlimited kilometres and includes 8 years of roadside assistance if you service your car to the scheduled servicing requirements. The actual scheduled servicing is every 12 months or 15,000 kilometres, with the 5-year total of cap price servicing being $2,388. Now there are a couple of things I don't particularly love about the Sorento S, and I will get it out of the way straight away. The first is the fact that it doesn't have keyless entry like an entry-level Kluger GX. And I know that sounds like a massive first world problem, but it is something you do get used to. You also have to insert the key in the steering column, but oh, life's tough. The second is that beeping that you can hear in the background. So it's easy to switch that off, but every time you start the Sorento, it automatically connects the lane departure warning and the lane keep assist, which is easily switch offable. You just hold this button on the steering wheel. But given how good the steering is in this car, I feel like it kind of muddies and detracts from how good the driving experience is in this vehicle. I know it's a safety thing, but it's still annoying. The other thing too is that the drive mode also resets to comfort every time. And while the Sorento still does drive well in comfort, I kind of wish that it just remembered what you were in before. Anyway, speaking of safety, because there is quite a lot of it in this car, for a base model, it does have AB not only for the front but also for junctions. It also has rear cross traffic alert collision avoidance, which is nice. It has blind spot collision avoidance, so again, if you try and change lanes into someone, it'll stop you from going in there. Other little bits and pieces like that. Has driver attention alert. It has that lead vehicle departure warning thing. It has a lot of stuff, given that it is an entry-level car. Now, onto the good stuff, and the first thing that absolutely springs to mind is the dynamics of the Sorento. Now, all of the goodness that we've talked about in this car would be less good if it drove like mush, and it absolutely doesn't. It has an Australian suspension tune, and I think that this is the most successfully tuned Australian Kia ever. It is the most cohesive to drive of any Australian Kia that I've ever driven, and it doesn't have any real weak points, like really any. Even the traction with those front-wheel drive, V6, 8-speed automatic, all that stuff that I mentioned earlier about the older model struggling with that isn't really an issue here. And because it has those retro chub 235, 45, 17s where those tyres bulge out so far, if you could curb the 17-inch alloys in this car, you deserve 10 out of 10, because I don't know how it would be possible. The engine is sort of SmartStream G. It's got new branding, but it is a relatively new engine. It has 200 kilowatts and 332 newton meters, and even though that torque figure comes in at 5,200, it doesn't feel like it's desperately lacking in torque. In fact, the 8-speed auto in this car is better calibrated than any Kia automatic that I can think of, Stinger included. And the drive mode that works in conjunction with that, when you put it in sport mode, it actually holds onto gears and does things that you want it to do, rather than just having a period where it seems like it's doing what you want it to do and then just sending itself back into drive. As for the actual dynamics and the handling, that is really where the Sorento is at its best. It is fluent, it is poised, it is easy to drive in a corner, really easy to place without being nervous. Just has this lovely weighting to the steering. Even in comfort mode, it's still pretty well weighted, and yet in sport, it isn't overly heavy, which was a constant criticism of Hyundais and Kias in the past, and just doesn't belong to this car anymore. And even though I've enthused about, say, the ride of the Kluger GX on its 18-inch wheels, which is supple, the Sorento just has a nicer balance between ride and handling. It treads a finer line, and it does manage to ride softly without feeling soft like the Kluger can sometimes. The body control on this car is really good. Its change of direction for something that weighs nearly 1900 kilos is surprisingly great, and about the only thing that I can think of that doesn't quite sit on the same page as all this sort of pseudo sportiness that you wouldn't expect from a car like this is its brakes. It does have four-wheel discs, but they do feel a little bit soggy, and I suspect that if it was towing that 2-ton capacity going down a fairly challenging twisty mountain, that you would need to be using the Tiptronic here and not just riding the brakes, because you're going to cook them pretty quickly. The brakes are also important too, because this isn't a slow car. With 200 kilowatts, Kia doesn't claim a 0 to 100 time for it, but it will be in the region of sort of 7.3 to 7.6 seconds, and that is not hanging around at all. That is moving. Yet you don't really need to use all that performance, because the Sorento is actually quite effortless to drive and doesn't sound too bad doing it either. It's not inspiring, but it's reasonably well refined, and that completely suits the overall persona of this car. Finally, to the driving environment, it's actually quite comfortable. The seat doesn't have a whole lot of under-thigh support, which is something that I've said about a lot of Kias and Hyundais in the past, but it's also not too bad either. It doesn't have very much adjustment, but it's easy to get comfortable in this car. The cloth trim is really supportive and grippy. The steering wheel is great. The vision is really good, and it even has this little extra window here near the mirror, so you're not looking at the mirror and the A-pillar as one. You have this little extra bit of vision to just make it more fun to drive and easier to place when you're having a great time with its handling. I think if you're dismissing the 4th gen Sorento as just being another Kia, then you're definitely suffering from perception lag, because this brand has come a long way since the last car launched in 2014, which was already among the top of its class, and now we have this model here, which I think is arguably the best car that Kia sells in Australia. It is the most cohesive in terms of its dynamics. It has really strong performance and refinement. It has so much equipment in this S model here, and it's 49 grand drive away. Like, what more could you want other than all-wheel drive maybe? It's so good even that despite the fact my partner said this looks like a baby boomer-mobile, I completely dispute that, because I would even own this car. Probably not in white, but just for its general smoothness and cohesiveness. It's a fun, practical, cool, reliable car with a great warranty. So what's not to love? If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and leave a comment on the 2022 Kia Sorento S V6 front-wheel drive or on Chasing Cars. Thanks for watching.